It's a real privilege to welcome Admiral Lorin Selby to class today, a dear friend of Steve and I and the country, actually. He's really currently a founding partner at this maritime-focused growth equity fund, and help me with that, get this right, Lorin, Maritime Capital, which is, he does a high-level consultancies with high-end folks like West Exec. He had just a distinguished career in the Navy. Professor Blank and I met him when he was the Chief of Naval Research, which dual hatted as the director of the Office of Naval Research. It's a huge organization that oversaw over $4 billion of investment and all sorts of amazing things for the Navy and the Marine Corps. He was the chief engineer of the Navy, which is pretty significant, and the deputy commander of Naval Sea Systems Command. For those of you who know, that's a big deal. Commanded an actual submarine, which is why I put this picture up here, the USS Greenville. That's a pretty special command to have, and it's an extraordinary accomplishment. He had his BS in nuclear engineering from the University of Virginia. And for those of us that went to West Point like me, that just makes him all the more fun to have a beer with. So we don't have the Army-Navy rivalry going in there, even though he was an admiral. And got a nuclear engineering degree at MIT, which is just pretty extraordinary. But more importantly, and Lorin, I don't want to sound like I'm at your eulogy, but he has had an extraordinary impact on the Navy and the military and our country.
Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe, and great to have you. As these students will listen to you and your career, I want them to imagine, and this is for everybody in the audience, how do you start to, where does something start to be the head of like all research for the Navy and the Marines, because the Marines are, as you kept reminding me, the Marines were part
of naval service, which is
naval service.
Marine Corps. That's right.
I mean, so let's start with you. Did you get your master's right after your bachelor's, or?
No, I got my undergrad degree in December of 1986 from UVA. I went to the fleet and I did my first tour on a submarine, and I went back after my first tour to MIT. So I've been on a submarine for 3 years, got my dolphins, got qualified, and then I came back to MIT after that for 2 years of grad school.
So what do dolphins mean for the?
So if you're a submariner, so in the Navy, there's different warfare communities. So there's the surface warriors, there's the SEALs, there's the aviators, and aviators, everybody knows what wings are. So aviators have wings above their pocket, and submariners have dolphins. So you get dolphins that adorn your uniform after you're qualified. And so the qualification process takes about a year, maybe a little more. Actually, it takes more than that, because you've got training before you get to your ship, and then you get your ship, and after you get your ship, it's about a year of learning every aspect of the ship, every system, every operation, every procedure. And then once you've done all that, you basically have a board where the commanding officer decides if you're deemed, worthy or qualified to actually earn those dolphins. And once that culminates kind of your first tour on a submarine. That's your job, is to get that qualification under your belt.
And when you went to University of Virginia Nuclear Engineering, did you know you wanted to be in the Navy with subs?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, so I think back about this a lot. How did I end up here? And I mean, I take it back to my childhood. So I'm a kid of the '60s, and I'm a space kid, right? So I grew up watching. I don't remember Mercury, but I remember Gemini, and I of course remember Apollo. And I, distinctly remember my dad getting me up on July 20th, 1969, to watch Neil and Buzz Aldrin step on the moon. And so I was just steeped in this fascination with both exploration, but also the science and technology that enabled us to be able to do things like that. And so that was always in my head. And then when I was so I wanted to be an astronaut for as long as I can remember. And then in high school, I think it was 10th grade, I think it was 10th grade, one of my teachers noticed I started moving from the back of the room towards the front of the room, class to class. And he finally stopped me after class and said, "Hey, can you see this?" And he held up something, and I was like, "No, I can't see that." He goes, "You may want to go see a doctor, because I think you need glasses." And that for me was like the freaking nail in the coffin, because back then there was no such thing as PRK or LASIK to fix your eyes, which you could do now and be a pilot, like my son did. But you couldn't do it back then, and there were no mission specialists back then either. So it was either be a pilot to be an astronaut or not. And so that dream kind of ended, and I was crushed. But as fate would have it, sometime within a year of that, I was at a friend's house, Larry Fletcher, and his father was there, and we were talking about. I was talking about the Navy. I was interested in the Navy. He said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I don't really know." He said, "You may want to consider submarines." And I said, "Oh, cool." He said, "I was a submariner." So he'd been in, and he was only in for his junior officer tour, so he was only in for like 5 years. But he told me that, and I was just fascinated by it. So I went and got some books, and I started studying about it. And something just clicked, and I was like, that is what I wanted to do. And I just knew, something like a 16-year-old. I basically said, I'm going to join the Navy. I'm going to be a submariner. I'm going to command a fast tech submarine, and I want to take it on a Western Pacific deployment. And I got to do all that. So I tell people I got to live my dream, and I still think I'm living my dream. So it's crazy, but I locked onto that as like a 16-year-old and said, that's what I'm going to do. And so kind of every decision I made from that point forward kind of was driven by that goal, that dream.
So the to be a nuclear engineer on a submarine, you kind of mentioned it was like pretty
Yeah.
tough to learn all the systems, right? This is
Yeah.
the old
Yeah.
Rickover Navy, right?
Oh
Nuclear
yeah.
Navy.
Oh yeah.
And why don't you share with the class what the Rickover and nuclear Navy is about, and why it's different,
Yeah.
and why there's never been an accident
Yeah. It's
versus the
incredible.
Russian submarine fleet, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm a Rickover. Hyman Rickover was the father of the nuclear Navy, and he was an engineering duty officer. So he basically, during World War II, he was working in the Bureau of Engineering, doing a lot of, I think he was doing mostly electrical stuff. And then kind of as the war ended, he knew, obviously we had nuclear bombs by then, we had atomic bombs, but he also saw the promise of what nuclear could do for generating power. And so he had this vision of actually harnessing, the atom, as it were, to propel a submarine. And so I don't have the numbers in front of me, but just in an amazingly short period of time, he was able to take that idea and then actually then drove that to the construction of a nuclear submarine, which in today's timeline would take you 20 to 25 years.
Three years,
It was
3 years for the
absolutely
Nautilus,
incredible. It was
three
absolutely
years,
incredible.
3 years
Yeah.
for the Nautilus, right?
Right.
It was
And all of the things, he had to invent materials that didn't exist. He had to come up with procedures that didn't exist. He had to come up with safety protocols that didn't exist. And so he drove this incredible rigor into this program that to this day is really a marvel of engineering talent, of rigor, of understanding safety, but also understanding risk and being able to manage that risk, but having procedures that were developed over decades that have allowed us to operate these reactors across the globe, as Steve said, without a major incident ever happening.
And for the
Absolutely
Navy,
mind-blowing.
Admiral, the reactors and the engineers are almost like a different subsystem that drops in the middle of a sub or carrier. I mean, almost a
Yeah.
different
Yeah, I
and
mean, yeah. So the submarine is very much, the aft end, the back end of the submarine is really all the propulsion plant. So you've got the reactor compartment, all the reactor components, the steam generating equipment, and then that all goes into an engine room with all the steam turbines that drive both the shaft as well as generate electricity, and then all the condensers and the stuff that brings the fluids back to complete the Rankine cycle, which is still how we drive our submarines today, a steam cycle. And then the forward end is primarily the electronics and the weapons systems and the crew berthing and the habitability systems to keep the crew alive. And that's kind of the way the submarines are. Carriers, a little different. I mean, it's a much larger vessel, obviously. The carriers today have two reactor plants on board. Submarines just have one. The first carrier we made was the Enterprise. It actually had 8 reactors on board back in the day, but those reactors were a lot smaller, and so we needed more to get the power we needed to generate the horsepower to drive those ships. Today's reactors can be much more powerful, much more power dense, and so there's only 2 on a conventional or on a nuclear carrier today. But
and
they're still marvels. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible technology, and all the latest electronics and monitoring equipment that we utilize today on these new plants is absolutely phenomenal. So yeah,
and your first command of a sub was the Greenville, is that
yeah,
right?
it's beautiful. It was. It was
And
indeed.
what was
Yeah.
that like actually?
Yeah.
You were an engineering exec officer, right? And now
Yeah,
you're
I mean, so I came up. I mean, that was my goal. I was always wanted to be a captain of a submarine, and so I mean, the way it works for the U.S. Navy, you have to be a nuke. Really, everybody on a submarine all the officers on a submarine are nuclear trained except for the supply officer. So
Hmm.
everyone else is nuclear trained, and so you go through the rigorous 6 months of basically a school. It's basically book learning about all the fundamentals, all the physics behind how a reactor operates and all their associated systems. And then you go to an operating reactor, a land-based or in some case down in Charleston, we have these, we call them floated types, old submarine hulls that have been converted into training reactors that are still in the water, but more to the pier. So you've got those and you got land-based ones up in New York. So you go to that facility for about 6 months and you actually have to learn to operate the reactor plant, start it up, shut it down, operate it, and you qualify what's called engineering officer of the watch. And that's your goal. Once you've done that, you're kind of completed your time at that prototype. Then you leave there and you go to Groton, Connecticut, which is the submarine capital of the world, and you basically spend 3 months learning all of the basic systems of the kind of the front end of the ship, all the ballasting systems, the emergency blow systems, the firefighting, the trim and drain, the stuff that makes the submarine be able to go up and down and stay at a certain depth, and all the combat systems. You learn how to fight the ship. And that's 3 months long. And then you go to your first ship. And again, you're on that first ship about 3 years. In job one, they send you back to the engine room and you learn to qualify that engineering officer of the watch again. So you learn for that plant how to start the reactor up, shut it down, operate it, fight casualties, simulate fires, flooding, steam line ruptures, all that kind of stuff. And that takes you about, it's about maybe 4 months, something like that, 3 to 6 months, some of that window. And then once you've done that, you come forward and you learn to become the officer of the deck. That's the officer responsible for the submarine for his or her watch, usually about 6 hours long, where you're basically driving the sub. Now you're not physically driving the sub like you've got people do that for you, but you're giving the orders to the helmsman, to the planesman that actually keep the submarine on depth, on heading, to all the sonar technicians, all the fire control technicians. The entire ship basically is under your command while you're on watch, and you report to the captain, and you do what the captain is intended for you to do for that watch. That takes again, that's about a year-long process from beginning of getting onto the ship until you get those dolphins, which is kind of after you become officer of the deck. The next step is getting the dolphins. So that first year on board is incredibly busy, very, very stressful, very pressure filled, and you're constantly studying and getting called checkouts. You basically have a qualification card, and you have to go. Let's say I've got a firefighting system, and I've got to prove to one of the subject matter experts on the submarine that I know that system as well as he or she does, right? And so they will quiz you, they'll ask you to walk around the ship and say to find certain valves and to walk through how you do certain procedures. And once you've satisfied that person that you have the requisite knowledge, usually after having several lookups that they send you to go do and come back a day or two later to prove again you learned those things, they then sign off your qual card. And then you do that for all the systems on the submarine and a host of other procedures and things to fight the ship. And once you've done all that, that's when you basically have that board where you sit usually it's in the wardroom, the captain chairs it, and you've got a bunch of other senior folks that basically pepper you with questions, and you've got a whiteboard and you're drawing things and answering questions and basically proving to them that you can fight the ship. And then
What a nerd out
Okay.
exercise. I mean,
Yeah.
boy, if you're a technical nerd, this must have been heaven.
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, it was stressful, but I mean, I love learning about every aspect of the submarine. And the times I've gotten to be on a ship when it's been in maintenance in dry dock, I particularly love it because then you can go up inside the ballast tanks and see all the piping you can't see normally, all the outside exterior hull fittings and all the different seawater suction and discharge. You see it all because normally it's underwater and you don't see it. So there's times in dry dock, it's not pleasant to be in dry dock because you want to be at sea, but to get the chance to really see and understand all aspects of the ship's engineering is really amazing, really amazing.
so you did all that, and then how did you become captain of a
Yeah,
sub?
so I mean, so you have a very prescriptive, pipeline that you have. So you spend your first 3 years on your first ship, getting your dolphins. That you then go to shore, some shore duty for 2 years. Then you come back to your next ship as a department head, and a department head is either the engineer, the navigator, the weapons officer, or the supply officer.
I
Again, nukes don't become supply officer. That's supply officers. But those three jobs. So navigator, weapons officer, or engineer. And you're basically in charge of now a department of men and women that own the systems in the engineering department, in the navigation department, or in the weapons department. And then that is a job where you are now really accountable to the CO to keep your department running properly, to make sure that your aspects of the department can fight the ship when it needs to. When inspections occur, you've got your part of the ship ready for those inspections. So I was first the navigator, and it's really nav ops. It's navigator and operations officer. It's combined. So I was first the navigator on a 637 or Sturgeon class submarine, and I did that for about 18 months. And the captain came to me and said to me, "Hey, Lorin, you're doing really a great job, and I want you to become the engineer of the ship. The engineer is leaving. We were going to get a new guy to come in, but I want you to fleet up and become the engineer, and we'll get another guy to relieve you as navigator." And I was like, absolutely. That's kind of what that was my dream, and it turned out. So then I became the engineer, and I did that for about two, I think a little more than 2 years, 2.5 years. I had to get two. You have to have two operational reactor safeguard exams during your tenure as engineer to have that count as your engineering tour. And that's the big, usually annual, it's a huge annual inspection where this team comes in and they basically run the ship through all of its paces and evaluate primarily the engineering department, but really also the officers that run the ship during the drills and make sure you can respond to all the casualties. And this is, again, why Rick Rivers set this up. So our ships have never really had any major incidents because we run ourselves through these incredibly rigorous inspections all the time. And you're constantly drilling, practicing for these casualties that fortunately have not happened, but we're ready to if they do happen. And as a result of being ready to, I think what we've done is we've actually also been able to, make sure that people are trained well enough to operate the ship so that these things don't happen. Because the systems on the submarine are so precise that it usually is human error. Not always, but majority of times it's human error that causes any of the things that do happen. Again, as minor as they may be. But anyway, so you do that.
Yep. Lorin, if I can, let's break here and remind the student the types of subs that the U.S. Navy, right? There's not just one type of submarine.
Yeah, so there's two families of subs. There are fast attack submarines, which
what
are
do they do?
Hunter killers, right? So these are the ones that go out and they're primarily out there to go find other submarines or to go find other surface ships, whether it's other enemy carriers or destroyers, or like World War II, we were taking out merchants back in the day. Then we're not doing that now, but it's the hunter killer kind of guys, fast attacks. They're out there looking for either surface or submarines to go attack, and I also have land attack missiles. They can launch tomahawk missiles that can go hundreds of miles inland and take out targets. The other family of submarines is the ballistic missile submarines, or what we call the boomers, because they have a nuclear weapon that goes boom if it's launched. And so the boomers, or the ballistic missile submarines, today is the Trident or the Ohio class submarine. And they have 24 missile tubes for these massive, called Trident D5 missile. It's a massive missile. You can hit anywhere on the planet from anywhere on the planet. So it's an incredible missile.
Made here in Silicon Valley by Lockheed.
Yeah, absolutely right. So Lockheed, that's, I guess, Sunnyvale, right? Yeah. Yeah.
But you were a fast attack guy.
I was a fast. I was as a midshipman cruise. I was on one of the old 640 class boomers, the Simon Bolivar, for a full 3-month patrol, and we actually did an operational test. So we were pulled in from patrol halfway through into Charleston, South Carolina, offloaded the special packages from 2 missiles and put on test packages, took off the nukes and put on these test missile things, test projectiles. We then went out to the middle of the Atlantic and we launched these 2 missiles downrange. It was absolutely incredible. And the captain said to me, "Hey, when we launch the missile, go into the missile compartment, upper level on the forward end, and look aft through the center line and just stand there and watch this." And so I did, and the whole submarine did this. And I was just like, it was incredible. You could feel the impulse pushing the submarine down a few feet, and you just see the whole submarine flexing. It was amazing. It was incredible. But
except if you're on the other end for real.
Yeah, right.
So you get your first command. What was that like?
It's one of those things you kind of dream about it, and you have this incredibly rigorous pipeline. It's yet another incredibly rigorous training pipeline to get there, and then you get through all that. And then you get to your ship, and you're supposed to have a month turnover with the old guy and the new guy going over stuff together, and you're trying to stay out of his way as much as you can, but you're also trying to learn as much as you can. And then finally the day comes, and there's the big ceremony, and you basically I relieve you, I stand relieved, and you've got it, and then you go down. Then you go down to the submarine for the first time. You're topside for this thing, and your family's all there, and you want to bring them down to show himself on the submarine. So you go down the ladder, and you're in the control room showing him the sonar stuff, and someone starts saying, hey, Captain. And then you don't register that it's you until like the fifth time he says, hey, Captain. And I'm like, shit, he's talking to me. And you're like, I'm the captain. And you're like, yes, what do you do for it? But it's amazing. I mean, um, and, and that's really where I mean, that is one of the crucibles that determines kind of who goes on and who does not, right? And there's clearly crucibles before that to make sure we put the right guys in command. But command at sea for the U.S. Navy is really that is the penultimate thing that determines whether you're going to be allowed to go on and be a captain or even an admiral one day. If you don't pass the mark of command at sea as an O5, and again for a submariner, for a surface warrior, that's a ship. If you're an aviator, that's a squadron. If you're a SEAL, that's you know a SEAL platoon. So I mean, it's those different levels that you have to get through to ensure that you've got the chops that the Navy wants to basically consider you for captain. So if you complete your commanding officer tour as a submariner, if the band plays at your change of command when you leave the ship, which means you didn't get fired, because if the band doesn't play, it means you got fired. There was no band.
Seriously? Are you serious?
Yeah, that's what we always say. If the band played, that means you're going to probably be captain. So we have a very high success rate of people who complete command successfully and making captain. So if you get through your command tour as an O5 on a submarine, high likelihood of becoming a captain.
So that was three years on the Grenville, and then you ended up as a branch head, right? Yeah.
Then I went to the Pentagon. Yep, I
Yeah.
went to the Pentagon, and I was a requirements officer basically, and so the Pentagon OpNav is its parlance. That's the Chief of Naval Operations Staff is the OpNav, and these are the different parts of the surface community, the submarine community, the aviation community, the special warfare community. All have a certain code in the Pentagon. Whereas there's an admiral and there's a host of O6s, O5s, O4s, and a few enlisted guys who set the requirements for that part of the Navy, for the submarines or surface or whatever.
And
so
for the submarine, what's a requirement?
So the way the Navy, or the way the DoD buys weapon systems, is we have to have a defined requirement that is basically validated by the service. And then depending upon the ACAT level, or how much money it's going to cost, it could also have to go to OSD to be blessed by the Office of Secretary of Defense and the Joint Staff. It's called JSIDS. The J8 does a lot of stuff. So these are really well-defined specifications of what we want to buy. Now, and I'll get into why I think that's not always the right solution for today's world later. But for things like submarines and large weapon systems that are highly complex, highly expensive, you do want a fairly detailed requirement to then flow down to basically industry to say, here's what we're looking for. Who can build this? Okay. When it comes to things like submarines or aircraft carriers, there's not a lot of wiggle room. There's really not. And I have some thoughts about that too. But those requirement setters have to understand the mission, have to have a little insight into the technology, but not as much as the folks who are going to actually design and build it, but have enough. And then also kind of understand the budgeting process, because there's a schedule-driven process in the building, the Pentagon, which drives when these requirements have got to be ready, when they've got to be presented to the Hill, and they've got to be presented to the industry. I mean, it's all very well scripted and detailed. But anyway, those requirement setters. So I was a branch head. So I was a captain select at the time. So I had a bunch of, I think mostly 4s and 5s working for me that actually wrote the requirements. And I was kind of the senior guy between me, and then I had a captain and then the admiral that basically requirements came to me for kind of being blessed, and then they went up to the captain and the admiral to be approved before they went to the joint staff. So when I went to that job, I was literally the guy who was responsible for the requirement for what is today the Columbia class submarine. Wow. At the time, we were calling it sea-based strategic deterrent. And that is the replacement for the Ohio class. So the boomer we talked about a minute ago, that's the replacement for Ohio. It's now called Columbia. So I was at the very beginning process of that, of validating something called the initial capabilities document, and then starting something called the analysis of alternatives. Because despite the fact that we have fairly scripted requirements, we still have to do an analysis of alternatives to ensure there's not an alternative to the thing we think we want that might also be able to fulfill the requirement. So we
Boy,
were,
we could have a longer conversation
oh
about
yeah, oh yes, we
why we
could.
replaced the 1960s system with another 1960s
Yes,
system in the
yes, we
21st
could.
century.
And I do agree. And I do think it's time to throw off some of these old conventions, even for things like submarines
But
and
now
aircraft.
we know who to blame, who started this thing.
There you go.
There we go. So quickly, Admiral, if you could summarize
Yeah.
all the program manager jobs until you became the commander of this of
Yeah.
the Naval
Yeah.
Service.
So I left the Pentagon and I went over to Naval Sea Systems Commander, NAVSEA, at the Navy Yard in DC. And I was initially an assistant program manager for something called Advanced Undersea Systems Office. Okay, I did that for about, I don't know, it wasn't very long, 10 months. And then the admiral came and said, "Hey, I think you're ready to be a PM." I go, "Okay, yes, sir." And then I became the program manager for submarine imaging and electronic warfare. Imaging, think periscopes, which are the old kind of optics and mirrors. And then the future ones are photonics masts, think digital cameras on the top of a periscope. So I did that as well as the electronic warfare system called the BLIC-10, BLQ-10, which is the submarine's electronic warfare system, which is what takes in electromagnetic energy. So, you know, radio communication stuff, brings it into the system, and then we can parse it by frequency and bin it, and we can try to decrypt it, we can try to listen to it, we can try to determine what it's trying to do. So I did that. I don't forget how long I did it, maybe 18 months. And then they came to me and said, "Hey, we want you to be." That's when I kind of went to the admirals and said, "I'm thinking about it's time to retire." And the guy admiral said to me, "You're not retiring." I go, "Well, sir, I'm actually seriously thinking about it." He goes, "Well, what's the one job you would stay for?" I go, "Well, that's easy. It's PMS 394, Advanced Undersea Systems Office, where I'd been the assistant program manager a few years prior, or a year prior." He goes, "Well, that's what I want you to do." I said, "You know." So I said, "Okay." So that was yeah. So I did that job, and that's where I made Admiral coming that job, and that was a very unique job. A lot of really amazing stuff we did, like a lot of really cool unmanned underwater vehicles, remotely operated vehicles. So really opened my eyes to kind of this what became the small agile and Maney years
This
later.
was 13 years ago, thinking about underwater stuff.
This was a long time ago. This was like 2012, something like that, 10, 12, something like that. Yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
tell us about the chief engineer and commander of the Naval
Yeah,
South.
yeah. So first flag job I had, I was the commander of all the Navy's warfare centers, well, the surface warfare centers.
What does that mean?
So we have these centers around the country that are staffed by thousands of people, some civilian and some contractor support, that do kind of all of the everything from the research and development work for systems that are on submarines and ships and aircraft carriers to the in-service support. So every single system on a ship, on an airplane, on a submarine, on any platform, every system. It could be the plumbing system, it could be the hydraulic system, it could be the firefighting system, the habitability, whatever. Every system has a subject matter expert somewhere in the Navy that knows that system better than anybody else in the world. Those people usually reside at one of the warfare centers around the country. And again, they have teams of people that are there to oversee the statistics that come from the ships about the failure rates and the things that are working and things that are not working. And so they're there to help both keep the systems in place now working, but also as we think about future systems and future ships, they're the ones that kind of come up with ideas of things to consider, things to not do again, things that we might want to do instead of something else. So it's a pretty important team that we rely upon heavily to make our current ships operate, keep them at sea, as it were. And then the other thing is there's a lot of R&D at these centers that looks at future tech, future applications of existing tech, future concepts of operations, and they're there to kind of help advise the chief engineer, the other program executive officers that are overseeing ships and submarines and aircraft carriers on kind of things they should consider for future platforms.
And like those were thousands, 10,000 people,
I
or
think I had at one point 25,000 people working for me across like 8 warfare centers. It was a massive job. Yeah. And of course, and the only ones you hear about are the ones that, get arrested for something. It's like, it's like, it's the old adage, right? It's like, 90% of your time, 10% of people take up 90% of your time. It's kind of true. When you're in leadership, that kind of happens sometimes. But I did that for about 2 years, maybe a little less than 2 years. And then I became the chief engineer. And
what's a chief engineer?
yeah,
I mean,
so the chief
that's
engineer
the
for
guy with the French. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So really, the Navy, the way the Navy basically sets up what we call technical authority. And so um, technical authority is really the ultimate authority to be able to make decisions based on sound engineering judgment without distraction from like finance decisions or even PR decisions to some degree. So let me explain what happens. So I was the source of the Navy's independent technical authority. It resided with me, nobody above me. Even the CNO, and John Richardson was the CNO, and he told me the only one in the Navy who can tell me no, Lorin, is you. You're the only one. But he said, and I want you to when you in your gut think it's what needs to be done, do it. But you have to stand on that. You have to understand you got to stand. I said, I got it, sir. And so here's what happens when you don't have independent technical authority. Think of the 737 MAX. Okay. So there's a new system being put on a plane that needs a certain amount of regression testing and flight testing. And because of schedule pressure, because of budget pressure, because of some PR buzz about the time they said they were going to have this plane out for sale, the engineers were all told, basically shut up and color. You're done. You don't have any more time. Put a bow on it. We're taking the plane. We're selling it. Well, we lost two 737 Maxes. You could say the same thing for Challenger and Columbia. They both had lapses where the engineers knew there were things that needed to be done, and their voices were squashed, and they were not allowed to basically do what needed to be done, which is to shut down stop that launch, or those kind of things. So independent tech authority is critically important, especially when you're operating a nuclear Navy, but it applies to the entire Navy, but
Got
particularly
it.
the nuclear
So,
aspects.
Admiral, you just made me understand how important an independent voice was as a chief engineer. Now
Yeah.
we're going to run out of time. Joe just reminded me we end at
Oh, yeah.
6:20, not 6:30. So I
Oh, you
wanted to
gotcha.
get to the good stuff.
All
Tell
right.
me about ONR, Office of Naval Research. Right? You went from chief engineer to kind of the
Yeah.
CTO of the Navy.
Yeah.
What?
So last time I was Chief of Naval Research, and so I had all the science and technology accounts for Navy and Marine Corps, and this is where you really. So that completed full circle for me, right? So I've been an operator. I've been doing the R&D stuff. I did the engineering stuff. I was a program executive. I was a program manager doing all the buying stuff. And this is the beginning of the entire process. These are the folks who are spending money on maybe just an idea that a phenomenon in a laboratory might have some credible military relevance in 5 or 10 years. And so you're basically taking bets on things that you think in 10, 15, 20, or even 25 years in the future might be a huge impact on warfare.
Full
Um,
stop, sir. So
yeah,
now
yeah,
let me just take that last line
yeah,
and connect it to the you were one of the first guys talking about the small, the agile, and the many.
yeah,
Can you
yeah,
tell us about that as head of
yeah,
ONR and
yeah.
what that was for the class? And
Yeah, so when I got to ONR, I asked people, hey, what are we known for? And they say, hey, we're the future of naval power. And I said, yeah, that's interesting, but I think it's more than just the future of naval power, because in my mind, that sounds very incremental. So I said, look, I think the world is changing so fast right now that we've got to be more than just incrementally trying to improve the Navy. We got to think how we're going to go to the next level, and we need a step change in the Navy. And so I basically changed. I said, let's talk about reimagining naval power, and I said, and let's talk about what the Navy, basically should be. And then let's talk about how we get there. Let's not talk about these incremental changes. And that resulted in a lot of thinking with my team about kind of where the world was going. And this was all in May and June and July of 2020. So it was during COVID. So I basically said, hey, I want to run an integrated battle problem because I saw unmanned as the future. I've been doing it for decades at this point. So I said, I want to do an integrated battle problem. And so we ended up putting together basically an experimentation event in San Diego that happened in April of 21, where we brought together all these unmanned systems and sensors from across industry, academia, and the government labs to go show that they could find a target and then send targeting data to a manned platform to sink the target. And it worked. It worked. That coming out of that, I basically went to Steve's ranch with a bunch of other folks, and we sat around where you are right now, same room you're in right now, with whiteboards, and we started spitballing ideas. And I still remember just going back and forth with you and with Mike Brown was there. There was a whole host. Raj was there. We had a host of folks talking about these concepts, and we came up with this idea of the small, the agile, and the many. And I don't know where hedge strategy came out of that, and some other conversations I've had with a couple other people like Ben Buskirk and others. So out of this thing, this idea of what I call a hedge strategy, which is basically the small, the agile, and many, was born during that period of time in my early tenure as the Chief of Naval Research.
Wow. So I want to leave a couple minutes for
Yeah,
questions, but
absolutely.
you're now a VC, right? And the Mayor of
Yeah,
Liberty, for those who don't know, stands for
freedom of the seas.
Freedom
Right?
of the Seas. Great name.
Mare is seas, liberum is obviously freedom.
Right?
So freedom of the
So,
seas.
so what's been your biggest surprise as
Yeah,
inside
yeah,
the building for the first time in 30
yeah.
years?
Yeah,
Um,
so when I had small companies come to me and pitch me on ideas before, I mean, I loved them and I got really excited about it. But I basically, I would tell my folks, oh, yes, go take a look at that and see what we can do. But I didn't do much more, because I just didn't, I didn't know. There's a couple things. There's a lot of ethics reasons why, but also I didn't really know what else they needed. So now, as a person on the outside, as an investor, when I go to these companies, I mean, after I kind of figure out who they are and get to meet people and understand that tech, the first question is, all right, what's your runway? How long are you gonna last here before you need an infusion of cash? Because they all say to me, "Oh, we want to get government contracts." I'm like, "Okay, hold on. Wait, how much runway you got? And are there any other sources of money other than the government? Do you have any commercial sources or any other sources? Because government's a hard customer." And so now I have a much better appreciation for kind of the fragility of these startups. I mean, they're usually looking at like 6 months. You're lucky if it's a year, but it's not. It's sure as hell not a 2 or 3 year budget cycle that we would, if you went into the normal churn at the Pentagon, you're not going to be able to fund that guy. He's going to be dead by then. So I've really got a great appreciation for how we've got to find ways to, the government's got to find ways to move cash quicker, but these companies also have to be more creative and find other sources of income to kind of bridge that. It's a valley of death of just funding, lack of funding.
so,
Government.
Admiral, one of the things I would summarize about your career is deeply steeped into technical knowledge and depth. But excuse the pun, but you
Yeah.
saw over the horizon when most of your peers in some of these program offices were seeing maybe across the hall. And that runs into an impedance mismatch about actually being able to actually implement the small, the agile, and the many when people wanted to still buy and build conventional things, right? I mean, that was kind of the
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, in the defense of all those other folks, I mean, you do find when you get immersed into these jobs, you're already looking at you've got an action list from the last person that's handed to you, and then you've got your own action list. So you hit the ground, you are sprinting. And I mean, you know, I think I've really trusted my people. And so I've always been one who pushes the responsibility of my teams. And that actually allowed me to have a little more breathing space to think more broadly and further down the road, to your point, over the horizon, as it were. I don't know if there's any great insights I've got, but I know I was able to give myself that time. And that was a critical component because I mean, I see so many of my friends were just like sprinting all the time and they couldn't even take a breath. Whereas I was able to trust my folks, push work to them, and that allowed me to actually really kind of see over the horizon and then be able to kind of help move the organization in that direction.
So, Admiral, just to kind of wrap up before we take questions from the students, what do you wish they were thinking about Navy, about DoD, about how to help? What advice would you give them?
Well, I mean, first of all, if they have a propensity or a desire to be a part of something like the Navy or Marine Corps, or even Army jail, yeah, I would encourage them to consider if they're of age and they're U.S. citizens and if that's something they think they could do, because it is an amazing life. I mean, I would not trade it. It's a phenomenal life. So I would say that's one. But two, if you want to find a way to support as a small business or as an innovator, I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity. There is, I mean, the recent announcement coming out of the National Defense Authorization Act just came out. There's a lot of money coming in a lot of these unmanned systems over the next couple of years. So I think there's a great opportunity set coming down the pike at this point. But I would also encourage you to try to help bridge this. There's as Steve said, impedance mismatch between the way the building speaks and the way industry is hearing things, and we got to figure out how to bridge that. And that only can happen with good dialogue between folks on the inside of the building and folks on the outside. And so if you've got friends there, or if you don't, make friends there and try to help them understand and they can help you understand what the the needs are. I think that's the biggest problem is I think we're oftentimes talking past each other, and I think that's a problem we can solve. That's a human problem that we can solve.
So, Admiral, thank you very much. All right, Joe.
Well, I think you hit on it, Steve, but maybe Admiral, what did you not get done that you would have if you were still on active duty? What was the next objective that you were aiming for?
I really wished I'd had the ability to kind of change some of the organizational structure, because I just tell you there needs to be some structural changes made to the way that the Pentagon operates. And a lot of it's around those requirements setting we talked about. It's very rigid. It's very much stuck back in like 1985. And there's far better ways to do things today. And I really wish I'd had kind of the opportunity to do that. That was a lot of my 8th Fleet Commander idea. I really think there needs to be somebody that can kind of bridge the gap between the operators, the warfighters at the pointy end of the spear, and people that understand tech and the building and the Pentagon. There needs to be somebody in the middle who really understands that whole ecosystem and can kind of bring it together. And I really wish that that would be the one thing I would have probably stuck around for.
Well, I hope the Navy catches up to some of the things you've written, with our own Professor Blank, but thanks for things you did get done and you there, Lorin.
Joe, anything you want to wrap up with?
No, just as I've said it earlier, Admiral Selby just been a great resource for the Navy, for our country, and just thanks for joining us and inspiring the next generation here.
Thanks, Joe.
And Admiral, I can't tell you, like, I now know what a submarine is and an aircraft carrier, all due to you, having to been on both.
Yeah.
That was the classic get out of the building exercise, is like spend a couple of days underwater and a couple of days at sea on a carrier watching their operations. And it's truly something to be proud of. This is kind of like the duality of man. If in a perfect world, we would spend absolutely $0 on police and defense and whatever.
Yeah,
and unfortunately, the history of human beings says that that's just not, we haven't figured out a way to do that.
Unfortunately.
And, I think as the Admiral said, and I just want to summarize, the goal for having, at least for the U.S., having a defensive force is just to simply let people exercise their own autonomy in the world going forward. Well, thank you, guys, and thank you, Admiral.
Thanks.
I always learn something every time I listen to you, Admiral. Thank you again.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Joe.